Welcome to the Cycling in Alignment podcast, an examination of cycling as a practice and dialogue about the integration of sport in right relationship to your life.
Greetings and salutations, Space Monkeys. Before we begin our episode, a brief reminder that this podcast depends on support from the audience. The reason I am able to continue with this project is because of the support of patrons. If you are a member of my audience and you feel I have offered you insight or added value to your cycling journey, please consider a visit to my website, colbypierce.com, where you can make a contribution to the Cycling in Alignment podcast. You can support the show for as little as $8 for a one-time contribution, or choose to subscribe as an ongoing member. Thank you for your consideration. Here's your reminder to think critically, act intuitively, and pedal consciously. So, Tyler Benner from Strong Feet Athletics, thank you for joining me on the Cycling in Alignment podcast.
Oh, I'm excited to be here, Colby. Thanks so much for having me.
Tell me your story, man. Tell the audience who you are and what's going on in your world.
My story always starts with archery. I shot archery for Team USA for almost 10 years and traveled the world with USA on my back. And I've shot over 1 million arrows in my life. I published an archery textbook with the US Olympic archery coach, and you could watch my old roommate and teammate shoot in the gold medal match of the last Olympics in Paris. Shout out Brady.
Cool.
Archery, that's where I really learned about posture. And, maybe a lot of people don't understand that archery is an endurance sport. Top archers are shooting 2,000 to 3,000 arrows a week. So it really is a lot of hours and a lot of high repetition. And so as an athlete, that means that your body needs to not be injured to perform at a high level, So there has to be some amount of periodization or some amount of adaptation. You can't just go from zero to shooting 2,000 and 3,000 arrows a week. It doesn't work that way, And your skin and your tissues, always require some adaptation. So, and then also archery is really technique driven. So it's very much of you're trying to align your bones and your posture in such a way that you're at your kind of lowest energy state at full draw. So that way you can really fire with precision, and you're kind of trying to turn your whole body into a trigger itself. So that way, because when you go to relax your fingers, you don't want the whole rest of your body's integrity to shut down right at that moment as the bow's firing. Even though your brain is sending the relaxation signal to your fingers, you don't want your shoulder to relax at the same time. So
then the bow will move and you'll miss your target, right? That's the whole point.
Or it's archery's equal opposite physics in action. It's like you really are trying to fire that arrow forward. And that means you have to create all these internal pressures such that when the shot breaks, you create the physics that you want at that moment. Right.
Right. So you're meeting a system of tension effectively, meeting a pressure weight, you might say. Yeah,
exactly. Yep. And then that's what feels so good when you fire a really good shot. It's like there's no extra little flutter in your body, or you can just feel the crispness of the release of the power. And it's this whole kind of shock wave that pulses through your body. And of course it then feels easy when you do it right, and then it's the shots that you don't get into as quite a nice alignment. Well, what happens is that you carry a higher tension and your muscles are straining more. So you're running out of oxygen faster. Your brain's getting tired, you're feeling the stress and the pressure, and you may have a harder effort now to make the shot go off.
Yeah.
So it's just harder to make the shot break cleanly, especially when your heartbeat is racing. And I don't know, I think you'll get a kick out of this. I'll ask you, how fast of heart rate do you think top archers have in the middle of a match?
I have no idea, but I can imagine it's quite high. Yeah.
One or two Olympics ago, they started using these cameras that can, sort of detect someone's pulse rate by seeing temperature changes in their skin fluctuation. And
Okay.
so, it's a guessed number, but we were seeing some archers in maybe like the silver medal level or in the semifinal level at the Olympics. Someone had a heart rate of 177 beats a minute standing
Wow.
in place trying to
Yeah.
fire an arrow.
Yeah.
Right. So like way up there.
Yeah.
And then you're
Mm.
also trying to control that amount of anxiety because like your blood is racing through your body. You are in fact feeling a lot of adrenaline,
Mhm.
and you're trying to synthesize that internally to be able to, oh, I am calm, placid waters.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's an enormous amount of sympathetic stress effectively, and heart rate is a proxy for sympathetic stress load, or an indicator, we might say, right? It's not the only indicator, and it's not one-to-one, but it's pretty, well, I guess that gets into a conversation about HRV and heart rate, and there's two sides to that camp, just like there are to every camp right now, right?
Right. My question I was going to ask you was, it's like, do riders sometimes in a breakaway, does their own kind of anxiety and nervousness that they might possibly win cause their heart rate to be too high while they're in the breakaway, and then that like robs them of energy to possibly actually break away and win?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I would say I've seen different. I would say it's actually far more nuanced than that. I would suggest that riders, when they're sympathetically driven, or you might say, depending on what lens they're in at the moment, right, during whatever they're doing, they could be in the breakaway. They could just be trying to hang on for dear life in the peloton, right?
Yeah.
And if they approach whatever, a technical section of a gravel race or a big climb or a descent, maybe, each of those could instigate different fears in a rider or different mindsets in a rider, depending on how they react to that environment. That can drive them into, I think it can drive people into quad dominance, right? Which is really an expression of red light posture, which is a move towards flexion and defensive posture, right? And that's going to change how you distribute load on a bike or standing to fire an arrow or doing whatever you're doing. It's going to influence your physiology from a biomechanical perspective. And then this is the challenge, is then you look at that athlete, you go, oh, well, their posture isn't ideal, and the situations want to correct their posture. But, like we figured out a million years ago with all these articles and studies that came out about how physical posture is a reflection of your mind state and your perspective, right? You see someone who walks into a bar and they have a meek posture and they have a bit of thoracic kyphosis, and then they sit on the bar stool and talk to the hot chick and she's like not interested, right? I mean, I'm playing out a sort of simplistic example, but or the concept of power postures. You walk into the boardroom and you're going to kick some ass or whatever, and you've got your tall posture and you're standing up straight, and maybe you're sticking your chest out excessively because you're overcompensating. So there's all these nuances to it. So I think one expression could be quad dominance ends up happening, or we'll say anterior chain dominance ends up playing out in sport when someone is, perhaps they go into that descent or hard climb and they're thinking they're confident until that point in the race, and then for whatever reason they've got a story in their mind which is, I suck at descending. Yep. Or maybe they crashed last year on this descent and now they're at the same event this year, the subsequent season, and they have to negotiate, like, how am I going to make it around this corner? This was a bad crash. Or maybe it's a crosswind section and the field starts to spread out into echelons and they don't know that technique. They don't understand it. And their efficiency goes down, their heart rate goes up. They shift from a confident or maybe balanced mindset to one of a fear-based mindset or a less than mindset, which is, a story people tell themselves about riding all the time. Now they look at their power when they get to the climb and they're going, whatever, pick a number, 350 watts at the bottom of a 30-minute climb, and they go, and they react to that number. I can't sustain that. That's above my, 5-minute power threshold, blah, blah, blah. And then suddenly, of course, they manifest that reality, right? That it can't, just like Yoda said, you believe you can or you believe you can't. Either way, you're probably right. And so those are, I think, outcomes. The other one that I see is athletes who I would say don't have really an optimal relationship with their daily life stress and their nervous system tone. They carry higher heart rates globally. And so we see them riding in, what we might call commonly zone 2 or endurance pace, something you could do for 4 or 5 hours if you're a fit athlete and training regularly, but their heart rate is 2 zones above that. So they're accumulating 4 or 5 hours.
More stress.
Yeah. Higher tempo heart rate or threshold heart rate. And, we're obviously looking at the heart rate numbers to see if these make sense. And then there becomes a discussion. Well, do we change their zones to reflect this? But there shouldn't really be a reality where someone's riding for 5 hours and they're seeing heart rates in the 160s, 70s, 80s. That tells me that something globally is challenged there. So I guess yes would be my short answer to your question, which I think is.
I love the way that you answered that. There's so much of I'm in agreement with you that your posture really signifies some of the psychology that's going on there, and sometimes in archery itself, like the accumulated stress that you have built up from your previous match is, similarly kind of what weighs you down when you have to like re-pull out your fighting spirit again. Because in archery, the way it works these days is there's first like a qualification round. So you shoot either 72 or 144 arrows for score. And then you're seeded first through last in a competition. And then first has a head-to-head match against last. And, then it's single elimination brackets from there. It's like you do have to kind of manage your stress, and also like you have to win each match. And so the psychology that you approach all of that with, and whether or not you believe, when you're a lower ranked archer and you're up against a higher ranked archer, you definitely have that psychology that you're trying to fight inside of you. And like that nervousness increases your heart rate, just makes it harder to be present and really, focus on the execution.
Yeah, that's interesting. And those bracket systems are specifically, they're the perfect cauldron to put you in that less than situation, because if there's 16 people that go through the finals, like commonly would be on the track, the same thing happens in match sprint. So they start with a 200 meter qualifying time trial, and then you're matched into brackets, right? And it's first against 16th qualifier. And the difference, even at the world level, is significant.
Yeah, it's tiny, right?
But, well, tiny in terms of numbers, but significant in terms of,
right.
Like the 16th rider knows that the chances of him beating the first place seed are next to nothing. So it's set up for a very impossible task. And we all have impossible tasks in our lives, right? It's like just the other day I was reminded of the Alice in Wonderland movie where she says, every day I'm going to do 3 impossible things, which I think is a great
before breakfast, mind you.
Before breakfast. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, exactly. Right. What a good way to start your day. I mean, you're winning already, right? So even if making your bed is impossible because you have 2 immovable cats in them like I do, but okay, so I have to ask you, when you spent your decade shooting arrows for the US national team, is the archery program primarily based in Colorado Springs or San Diego, or a different training center?
It's now in San Diego. And, it's kind of changed over the years. And, the USOC funding has always changed so much, and the sports themselves. And, archery has had, to some degree, a little bit of a battle of even being in the Olympics at all. There was I guess the first archery was like back in 1905 or something like that. And it was, I think the first women's Olympic sport is actually archery. And then they did it for a couple years, a couple Olympics at that time. But then there was a hiatus for a number of years. And then the modern archery in the Olympics started in, I think, like 1972 in Munich. And, then the format itself of the competition has changed a little bit over time. It used to be a little bit more cumulative score dependent. And then they've started in the last kind of 20, 30 years, they've altered it to be more head to head with these single elimination matches like I described, and then world championships and Olympics and all, they have a similar format. And, then of course there's like state and local and competitions and so forth. And, that's how I got into it, where I grew up in Pennsylvania. There's a lot of archers, who are typically hunters often, but then there was a club that I was able to belong to, and that had a 24-hour range that I could shoot at, and it was only a couple miles from my house. And so, I was able to get those reps in. You really need the reps, you need the time on the bike, you need the miles on the road, whatever it is.
Yep.
Otherwise, you don't get that early foundation.
Yep.
And then also I got all that competition experience, and it's definitely like cumulative. The higher the level you get to, you're just not anywhere near as nervous at some of the lower levels. And it's really that stress and that anxiety is what you have to get used to. And some top archers, they're probably shooting, I don't know, they're competing maybe 30 weekends a year or something. It's like a lot of competition. And so you really just get used to that cauldron of, it's like, oh, when the whistle blows, this one's for score, this one counts, whatever. And when you've done that a lot, it's just a little bit easier when you really want them to go in the middle.
Yep. I really like what you said earlier, which was, it feels easy when you do it right. I think that's a non-trivial statement, because it goes against the grain of popular conceptions about sport, which it's like a myth that never dies, right? I don't mean myth in the positive way. I mean it in the kind of crappy way, which is that, David Goggins is the poster child for keeping this alive.
It's pain and suffering, right?
Yeah, no pain, no gain. Pain and suffering is the only path through. You have to force your way to do anything, that kind of mentality. And yes, of course, there are moments to have force in life, but there's balance. And right now we have this cultural perception, at least in the sports world, from my perspective, that that's dominated by that paradigm. People just, they have a hard time conceptualizing it any other way. And in cycling, I think the sport is suffering from that, in particular because of the unintended consequences of everyone having a power meter. Just like, I'll say as a sweeping statement, I have yet to experience any technology that does not have unintended consequences. I mean, it's the nature of inventing a new technology. You have a great idea, hey, wouldn't it be amazing if, instead of having to wait a week to write when you write a letter to your grandpa, it takes a week to get there, and then he has to write it, and it takes a week to get back to you. Couldn't you just write him a letter instantly, and he would get it like that? Imagine how convenient that would be, how much more in touch you'd be with your grandpa. And now look at the unintended consequences of inboxes, right? Like, we're all professional email managers, right? Unless you're under 17 and then you don't care, but which is great. But unfortunately, that's been replaced by TikTok. So anyway, I digress. So, tell me about your shoes, man. Tell everyone about your shoes.
Sure.
Here we go.
Here.
Yep.
So we got the two colors here.
Okay.
These are the first barefoot minimal cycling shoe that is mass production. We just finished the first batch of 2,000. The first 100 pairs have been sold out, and we've already shipped them out to customers. And you were one of the lucky recipients. So you've had a pair for a little bit. I'm sure everyone will be curious to hear the little bit of time you've been able to put your feet in them and maybe spin around on the bike for a minute. But this has literally been almost now a 10-year project, or this year will be our 10th year. So for many years, I tried hard to make them in the United States. I also manufacture some furniture, and I have an archery textbook and a few other archery accessories. So, I've been in the business of selling products to customers for many years now, but I've been really trying hard to make a cycling shoe, because when I really realized what was going on with my feet, I started running in toe spacers from Correct Toes, and I was living in Portland, Oregon. And Dr. Ray McClanahan, his office is right there in Portland. So I was able to get connected with Ray and tried on Correct Toes, and was like, I immediately had all these flashbacks to being in the training room at the Olympic Training Center in San Diego, because I just have memories of some of my colleagues, or, you see people as they're getting therapies, or what their body looks like, or your body, or you're in the training room and you're seeing these huge people throw up these gigantic weights over their heads and so forth. And it's like, you definitely become a bit of a student of people's physiology a little bit. And So as I was just kind of walking around in toe spacers, it was like I could feel that my entire skeletal system was going to need a bit of a different alignment to really get all of my toes kind of evenly applying pressure to the ground. And so it's like I had a instantaneous light bulb moment wearing correct toes for kind of like the first time, toe spacers.
Yeah.
And then for maybe like a year and a half, I was running with toe spacers a lot inside of shoes, and it was at that same time that it was like I realized my old cycling shoes were one of the main contributors to pinching and squeezing my toes. So, and then cycling shoes are extraordinarily rigid. And that made me upset, I guess. It's like I didn't want the cognitive dissonance of realizing that, some of the deformities of my feet were going to be perpetuated by continuing to ride in my old shoes. So, I started riding way more kind of flat pedal with some of the barefoot and minimal style shoes. And like that gave me the confidence that it's like, well, this does feel good. And I know that, for cycling, well, you want to be attached to your bicycle. You need to have this kind of symbiotic connectedness where like the vehicle and you become part of the vehicle, so you can be this like fully sprung component, of the vehicle. And, that's why I wanted a carbon sole on the thing too. It's like, I know what that experience was already like, but there was just no way to have the kind of foot mechanics inside the shoe. And so, then began just this long journey of, we met with a bunch of existing cycling shoe brands, sent them foot tracings, all kinds of information, tried to show them all the various things we knew about toe spacers or making your feet strong. And, just no one was interested. Or, it was like we were talking to people that's like, oh, you're in some weird little category that we don't understand. Like, we have a high volume shoe. Certainly our high volume shoe is what you're looking for. It's like, well, no, we're still really talking about something different. And the kind of realization I had to eventually come to terms with was trying to find both a factory that was willing to make a shoe shaped like this and could make a cycling shoe. Those were two really hard things. And eventually I kind of realized that trying to do both at the same time was too hard. And then I really started to narrow my focus down to find some factory partners who already had prior cycling shoe experience. And then from that point, we've been able to make these just, frankly, I think amazing products. The fit and finish quality on them is extremely high. I think there's going to be a great value for customers. Inside the box, we're also including some shoe covers because I know how important keeping your toes warm is. And when you're riding at high speed, you get the wind chill. It's really terrible. So I at least wanted to enable three season riding, and the normal shoe covers that are on the market, well, they might not fit the toe box of these shoes. So it's like I've kind of had in my mind, like I know what some of the key problems that need to be solved are. I have had some messages from people talking about the weight of the shoe, and it's like it has a carbon sole. It's definitely a very capable shoe and highly performant like that. It is heavier than other shoes on the market. It's like, well, there's two reasons for that. One is it's actually more material. If our shoe is wider, it's like it's probably going to be a little bit heavier in some of these ways. And then also, this first version of the shoe, we've made it work for both SPD and the Delta 3-hole cleat system because, we wanted the first shoe for people that you could use it, whether you were more road focused or whether you're more gravel and mountain focused. And we really kind of needed to have a solution that met customers' demands and needs on both in one shoe. So, I think in the future, we could consider doing some more focused on road only or mountain only and, offer more protection to the carbon sole from scrapes or damage from rock strikes and things like that. Or, we could make the road version a little bit lighter weight and so forth.
Yep.
I see the value of doing some of these kinds of things, but first we're really trying to show people that there is a different way of making a cycling shoe, and we think we've made it. So far, some of the feedback from people is really positive and exciting, and to be sold out on our first 100 pairs that shipped via air is also really thrilling and exciting. So I can't wait to see what everyone thinks of the shoe. And now I'm curious for some of your thoughts. So have you been able to ride the shoe at all? You said maybe you were going to spin around on some rollers a little bit.
Yeah, no, I haven't been able to ride. Unfortunately, I got the shoes 2 days ago for the audience, and yesterday I emailed Tyler and said, "Hey, man, it's a high of like 5 today, literally 5 Fahrenheit." So we are at the peak apex of winter right now, and I burned probably 99% of my indoor riding matches over years and years of World Cup racing and training. In 2004 or 5, somewhere in there, I think that's right. No, I think it was before that. I don't know. I don't remember. Early 2000s sometime, the UCI changed changed track cycling, which was my international focus, to a winter sport. So that turned it into a full, it nuked the normal rhythm of, in December, November you take time off, or maybe October, and then you do base, and then you build up, then you deal with winter, and then you go and you have summer season. Now it was just flat out all year for me. So that changed things around, and it required a lot of indoor riding. And this is before the days of smart trainers and Zwift, obviously, but I did a lot of intervals on the rollers indoors. And I'm 52. I've been in the sport a long time. I've raced 1 billion bike races, and there's certain things I just don't need to do anymore. So I'll ski, I will run in the snow, I will do strength, I do BFR, or, different primal movements, or just pick up heavy things, etc. I do, different flavors of movement, but riding indoors is not typically one of them. So I haven't ridden the shoes yet, but I did try them on, and I'll say, I recently released a course on the foot and ankle on the Team EF coaching channel. It's called, it's under our category of courses is called Skill Academy, and this is cycling in the foot and ankle. And one of the chapters in that is about how people should choose a cycling shoe, right? And one of the simplest ways we can do that is to go to the bike store and say, "Hello, my name is Tyler, and I'd like to try on every shoe you have in a size, whatever, 43 and a half. Put them all here, please, and then leave me alone for 45 minutes. And what I ask riders to do is try them all back to back, so that they can get a real feel for what works and what's a deal breaker. But the other thing I think is handy is we take the factory insole, or really insert, out of the shoe and put it on the ground, and then put your foot on that insole and make sure the heel is aligned, right, with where it would be if your shoe was on. And then just observe the relationship of the width of the forefoot of or really it's, indicative of the width of the forefoot of the shoe to some degree, based on how much hangover there is between your metatarsals, that's the base of your toes, and the width of this insert, right? And then also notice any discrepancies in the shape of the insert versus the shape of your toes. And, you've got a bit on your website about this, some simple diagrams to illustrate this concept, which is that most cycling shoes turn your feet into shoe-shaped feet. And really, we don't want a shoe to turn your foot into anything other than a foot. It should respect the proper alignment of the toes, right? And many people's toes have been sort of smashed into this sort of weirdly missile tip shaped sort of half round thing. Because why? Because culture, because society, right? Because that's what looks correct, because someone decided it looked correct and then everyone else jumped off the cliff with them, I guess. And to me, what looks correct is a shoe that's shaped like a foot. That looks correct to me, to my eyes. But I'm like you, I see how the function of the foot plays into the function of delivery of power on the bike, or delivery of power while walking and standing, right? And alignment of the skeletal structure, stacking of the structure, and delivery of force using sling systems at the right moment. So very long way to explain that when I put my foot in your shoe, I felt no sense of restriction at all, which is very, very unusual. And and I think it's so much so, the same thing can be said of saddles. I think there's two little red flags we have to watch out for. One is riders are so used to jamming their foot into something and expecting pressure to be there that they don't really observe it when it is there. And maybe you might only notice when it's not there, right? You go, oh, wow, I didn't know all my other shoes restricted my foot this much. I see this over and over and over again. It's someone especially people have had who have pretty wide feet, and you put them even in a lake shoe, which is a great product, but doesn't have an optimal toe box shape, in my opinion. I'll just say that. And I'm a lake dealer, so I'm being transparent here. Like, they've got some really nice features, and they've got some very limiting features. And so when we put someone's foot in a wide lake model, like a 242, for example, and they've never had a shoe with enough forefoot room, and they put it on, they're blown away. I mean, you see it in their face. They're like, whoa, I didn't know a cycling shoe could do this, right? So your shoe does that, but with the proper toe box shape. And I will post a photo of this online on our Instagram drop. I'll put my foot on top of your insole, and we can see it's basically a perfect tracing of the shape of my foot. There's like happy 2 millimeters all the way around, all the way from the metatarsals all the way up to the toes. And awesome. Everything can just be the way it is. There's no impingement. There's no changing of shape. There's no compression, no tension. I think that's one thing is riders, they're used to jamming their foot into something. And that just is what they accept as normal. That's like the goldfish doesn't know it's swimming in water. The second problem is sometimes they jam their foot into a shoe, and there's two subsets of this. One is they believe that if the shoe is tighter, it will, air quotes, give them more power transfer, end air quotes. This is incorrect. And I would love to unpack your perspective on that. I think you agree with me pretty much. Pretty clearly, given the fact that you just spent a decade making a shoe to solve this problem. And then the other belief system that clouds people in this is they believe mistakenly or erroneously that all suffering goes in the same box. And that box is the more you suffer, the faster you go. And this is incorrect, right? So, you go out for your first 100K ride, maybe it's in January or maybe it's February, depending on where you live and how much snow you have. And sure enough, all this stuff hurts because you just did your first long ride, and you come home and your legs hurt because you rode 100K outside for the first time in a while, and your lungs hurt because maybe you went hard, right? And that's normal. Those are accepted compromises, and that's load we're trying to instigate into the body during hard training. But it doesn't mean your toes should be either completely asleep or your metatarsals should hurt because they're being smashed by a shoe. It doesn't mean your junk should be asleep because you're on the wrong saddle. It doesn't mean your neck and back should be on fire because you didn't do the proper conditioning work to assume the cycling position and your handlebars are way too low. But people frequently fail to discern, athletes fail to discern in general, I'll say, between those two types of discomfort, and they put them all in the same category, which is, well, you just got to harden up, and it doesn't matter if my legs hurt or if my toes were completely nuked at the end of this cold winter ride. Either way, it's making me better. No, this is not right. Anyway, that was a lot of words.
I love what you said there. And I think I know how to add on to it to give the audience a little more color. Exactly. So you talked about when you jam your foot in, that it's like it's squeezing your toes, but they don't just squeeze sideways, right? Like, I think this is one of the core parts that people need to understand, So for me, let's see if I can get it on the camera. It's like some of my outer toes, especially, they kind of went up onto the top of my foot a little bit, So now
your fifth and fourth toes went over your third and maybe second. So the toes were like, layered.
Yeah. And so then imagine doing however many millions of pedal repetitions and trying to apply power a certain way. Mm-hmm. You've shut off the nerves connected to those toes to create that stability through your leg. And so now your hip and your knee and everything is like cycling in a particular way over and over and over. And it's like, it's building up that neural pathway, but now you're only pedaling with 3 toes.
Yeah.
And it's like, do you want to pedal with 3 toes or do you want to pedal with 5 toes? So I think that's some of I was trying to say directly. It's like, that relates to your balance, right? It's like, if you feel more balanced and you're not as afraid of your weight shifting around, it's like, well, you're going to be able to corner better. You're going to be able to have your brain at like a lower intensity level trying to do path choosing. as you're navigating bumps or, road surface changes and so forth. So,
or single track on a mountain bike, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah.
we're trying to get that body's perceived center of gravity as low as possible to maintain your stability. And that's related to you talked earlier about that defensive posture when you're then like more like perched on top of it rather than like low slung, like applying pressure from down below rather than perched over top. I think there's all kinds of different ways to think about how your posture changes when you really are thinking carefully about each individual toe and its pressure and how it's connected to the ground to create that fully sprung, fully dynamic system that's all working together.
Yeah, yeah. And then the other interesting feature of your shoe is that it has no toe spring or heel rise. So all conventional shoes have to some degree, with exception of the Lore is the only other shoe I know. And well, that's not entirely true. If we look at a lot of, flat pedal mountain bike shoes, they're just flat. But that's sort of its own category of stuff. But in a typical more, road gravel mountain bike market, every shoe, barring yours and Lore, has some profile to it, and it's like an S curve, right? So the toe spring is where the toes rise up from baseline, and the metatarsals would be considered baseline, and then the heel would rise again from that. And normally there's almost like an S curve from the heel down to the metatarsals, and then the toe spring comes up like a Dutch clog, right? Is the way I describe it. It's like your toes are being pulled up towards your shins. And I think it's a classic, seemed like a good idea at the time. Like the best I can figure out on this without having spoken to anyone who's a orthopedic cycling historian, which probably is a thing that doesn't exist. Like, why do we have this? And I think that from what I can tell, it's a carryover from the era of leather or wooden soled shoes when the soles weren't as stiff. And they really were trying to mimic the foot of the shape in some sort of acceleratory phase, some sort of push-off phase of gait.
Yeah.
Right. So you look at a sprinter, you slow-mo Usain Bolt, and his foot is in that position almost the entire race, right? His toes are sprung. He's landing and accelerating off the bell of the foot. That's an extreme situation. But again, it seemed like a good idea at the time. It's like, well, if every time I put on my cycling shoes and ride my bike, I just accelerate the entire ride, I'll be really good, Yes, true statement. But there's also this rule of strength and conditioning, which says that the body can only accelerate that which it can absorb or decelerate, meaning the nervous system will not push weight more than it can slow down the same. That's really poorly structured sentence. Anyway, you can only concentrically load what you can handle eccentrically, right? Which corresponds to acceleration and deceleration. So if we train the foot to only handle acceleration, your muscles become incredibly poor, and your nervous system and your fascial system notably become somewhat blunted or retarded at dealing with eccentric force. And cyclists are notoriously bad at dealing with eccentric load because in cycling, there's only concentric load anyway. So the Strong Fit athletic shoe, which the model's called the Leviathan, right?
Leviathan,
it's completely flat. So tell me about that. Why you specifically chose to make that design consideration or that engineer that into the shoe.
Yeah.
Was that always the case?
It was. That was definitely one of the core starting principles of making the shoe and like the whole concept. And, so people can understand a little bit better, you see that there is this curved section.
Yep.
And
that's for the cleat
that was required. That was required in order to fit with all the cleat and pedal systems on the market and not require those cleat and pedal systems to retool anything.
Yep.
So, because so many cycling shoes have this built-in curvature like you described, there's just so much inertia to do it that way. It's built into all the cleats and the pedals and the shoes and everybody.
Yep.
And so they kind of feel like that there's no harm in them not changing things because it's been done that way for so long that it's like, oh, we don't have enough people complaining about this thing that we understand, so therefore we're not going to change anything. And so, my idea when I was first making the shoes at all was just like, well, what is it like to ride a bicycle with a flat surface that has enough room for my toes to spread out, and I kind of think that there's not that much difference between just a flat pedal and the inside of the shoe itself, you know? And so we're just trying to think about, well, what is your actual foot shape either on the pedal or inside of the shoe? And those are kind of the same concept to me. And earlier when you were talking about concentric and eccentric loading, for instance, I especially relate to this in regards to how my foot structure has changed from one, running in toe spacers, and then two, learning to run in sandals. And when you're running on sandals, especially, there's no extra help from the shoe to keep you in the shoe, or keep you on the sandal. It's like, so you have to get really good at getting your foot down on the surface and then back off of the surface without creating these really large shearing loads. And that is very related to your ability to control that bounce or that transition where you're talking, you need some amount of concentric and eccentric loading to like be able to spring off the ground without making this shearing force underneath your foot right at the moment of impact.
Interesting.
And
yeah,
that's especially how the bike shoe feels a little bit. So many people are effectively relying on the shoe to keep them on the bicycle, is another way to say it. It's like they're so kind of disconnected from the bike that they don't actually have pressure on the pedals. And it's like they're kind of using the shoe itself to prevent their whole posture from like flying off of the bicycle, Whereas I think, or especially when you start to get really skilled at riding standing up, for instance, it's these series of like one-legged hops that you're trying to manage to like get as much of your body weight over that pedal as possible while also doing the least amount of work to get onto the next pedal. It's both this like fully load one side of your body and then jump onto the next one, but do it in this, dancer-like way. That's why, Phil Liggett is talking about dancing on the pedals, and like that's all of our childhood memories and stuff like that. It was my pursuit of wanting to dance on the pedals in the same way that I was feeling dancing while running, or really feeling my toes spread out. And it's like I had to change my whole biomechanics of how my body was able to load as an entire system once I was getting all of my toes activated correctly together. Because again, I was doing so much of running, cycling, whatever, on only 3 toes on both feet. So then there was this kind of realignment of the river of the energy through your body that creates the power. It had to find like a slightly different pathway. And I like to describe it like the ground kind of tilted a little bit, especially more on my left side of my body. And as I followed the energy pathway, I guess, over time, and now it's almost like 10 years of me trying to realign my ankles, my knees, my hips. It's like, well, some of these old, I had a little bit of bursitis underneath my left hamstring, for instance, and I would always feel it like while pedaling. It was like there was something underneath there that would just get irritated. And it's like, well, I previously used to think that stuff was much more genetic. It's just like, oh, well, some people are more straight than others. Well, a lot of us, I think that we just kind of believe that that's the way our body is. And so we need to suffer. And then there isn't necessarily this curiosity that it's like, well, can I really go do something about this? Can I actually change the position and structure of my bones? It's like, I don't think many athletes are asking themselves a question like that. Whereas, I was never educated to make my feet strong by any coach, any trainer in any sport I ever played, all the way from growing up as a kid until now. And then what I've been exploring in my, it's not that there aren't people who know how to make their feet strong in some particular sports, but it is not a mainstream bit of knowledge yet. And I just believe in this concept and idea that athletes of all sports need to get their human biomechanic foundation like from this. Your feet need to work correctly first. I think it's going to be really hard to do that if you're not doing running and walking in addition to other sports. It's like you have to train your kinetic chain with the right repetition in order to reap the benefits of developing that neuromuscular system.
Yeah.
And then, for people like you and me that maybe have like learned this later in life as we're, maybe past some of our ultra competitive years, it's like, well, we just have a long rehabilitation period of undoing some of the damage that possibly has been caused to our body. And that's also a good place to be as an athlete, though, too, because I feel like, I always wanted direction to know of how I could make improvement. And I think there's a lot of people, like you were saying earlier, that just think that more hours, more suffering on the bike turns into more performance, but that's only working on your engine. And it's like, well, maybe you could work on your suspension too. If you're a Formula One fan, it's like you recognize there's the engine, there's the suspension, there's the aerodynamics. It's like these things all have their different components. And I really feel like shoe companies broadly in any sport have not really been looking at the suspension very much. And then there's been this kind of either financialization or like measurement focus of make this number go higher. And then it's optimizing around some of these principles, like trying to make everything lighter weight, but then that's going to make narrow and narrower shoes, for instance. It's like, sure, we can make the shoe lighter weight by making it narrow. That's easy.
And more aerodynamic in a wind tunnel.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. So
more missile shaped.
There's always kind of like fudging that seems like when you get your priorities backwards and you practice that belief of like, oh, well, that's just the way we've always done it. Sometimes you get into these weird corners, and that was my awakening years ago. Was just like, wow, I realized I was in on it too, and earlier I was proud that we had shoe developers from Nike or Adidas like come to the Olympic Training Center and, oh, we're going to help you make a shoe for your sport specifically. And it's like not one single one of those people talked about foot strength or how to spread your toes or what that really means for balance or any of this kind of thing. So it's like, it wasn't until years later that I realized they weren't doing principal science. There wasn't like this really thoughtful approach to human biomechanics. It was much more of like window dressing, which is all right, I guess, but that's also what's motivated me to do something different.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of entrenched thinking in footwear and in shoes, both in cycling and outside of cycling. And I think there's a lot of window dressing is a good way to put it. A lot of cosmetic draw towards a certain type of shoe that, looks cool or whatever. And to me, I've always felt that form is secondary to function, right? We have to prioritize how the thing works first. And I was the first guy to go cutting holes in my shoes at the right time to give my fifth metatarsal head a little more room, right? I have these little pointy dragon heads on the tops of my feet that stick up, and those things were driving me nuts. I can't race a bike like that. And I was smart enough to figure out a billion years ago, like, I don't care if my shoe has a hole in it. I'm going to win a road race here. Like, I don't care. And I probably didn't win the race, but the point is I wasn't afraid to butcher my shoes. And some guys just look at me like I'm insane, but that's okay. Yeah. I have no problem embracing the archetype of the fool at times to do my own thing and be on my path. Right. Hopefully that inspires other people to be a little more brazen about what works for them.
I think people would be really curious to hear from you what your transition was like to having your shoes looser and looser over time, and like how you dealt with the feeling of, I guess, fear, or maybe that you were less connected to the bike, but not really, or, like how did you deal with learning to, because I know that you've been riding in the lower shoes for a while now, and it's like, to get used to really spreading your toes is a different sensation of pedaling. So maybe could you describe to people what that's like, or what they might think, or what that several months worth of feeling might change to be like?
Yeah. I mean, for me, the journey has been quite long. Like I started out as a junior with, well, to frame it for context, I'm an athlete who kind of breaks the mold a little bit in a couple ways. Because if you put me through, for example, a 9-point Byton flexibility test, which, in case the audience isn't familiar with that,
I
it's just
remember
a
you were
simple,
mentioning this the other day.
yeah, it's a simple 9-point screen you do that really looks at ligamentous laxity in the human body. And so you'll have some people who test super high. The higher you test, the more flexible you are. And if you get up into the 7, 8, 9 range, then, we could ask the question, could you potentially be labeled or diagnosed with the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a syndrome where you have hypermobility of the joints, right?
Yeah.
And people who are on this end of the movement spectrum they have real problems to solve in their lives, because as they become strong in anything they do, their joints struggle to transmit that force in a clear path. And so the stronger they become, it's quite likely for them to become injured, unfortunately. So they really have to figure out how to stabilize their system. And their exercises need to really be oriented towards stabilization rather than strength, as a general statement.
Or more flexibility.
What's that?
Or more flexibility, right? It's like more on the control and the, right?
Yeah. Well, like you said, they want to focus dominantly on their chassis, not on their engine, right?
Exactly.
Or Paul Chek's classic saying for this, you can't fire a cannon from a canoe, right? So we I was definitely in that category. I'm not, I don't believe I have Ehlers-Danlos, but I do believe that I'm close. Yeah. I'm that mobile. But what's interesting is I score low on the Byton, but I'm hyper mobile in by any conventional standard. I can do a super deep squat and my butt can touch the ground with my heels on the ground. I can easily touch palms to the floor with both knees locked in a forward bend, right? As two examples. Mm-hmm. I'm not that good in all things, but I'm quite good in most of them. And so I'm on that side of the spectrum where I need to find stability before I can really gain a lot of strength. And if I try to go too quickly to strength, I'll injure myself. Mm-hmm. So I learned that early. And so in the world of feet, that means that I had, really air quotes, flat feet, not meaning that my arches weren't, actually didn't want to have structure in their ideal form. It's that they lacked the tension necessary to hold structure under load. So if I stood on one leg, I would get this massive amount of internal pronation, or as I kind of prefer to call it, internal spiral of the lower limb, right? And the arch would collapse in and the navicular would drop. And so I'm riding my bike for the first 6, 7 years, just riding with my feet in CDs. And it was like putting my foot in a shoebox. Like my foot's just moving around in there, and I'm always over tightening, and the straps are hanging off the end because I also have very low volume feet. Mm-hmm. And so I quickly realized that if I over tightened, that didn't work, because all that happened was the shoe didn't really fit my foot that well. And it would apply pressure points in certain areas and restrict movement of circulation of bone, fascia, muscle, ligament. It would restrict all that movement. And I would just get pressure points, hot spots, or numbness. So then there was this battle. It was like, tighten less, tighten more, tighten less, tighten more, tighten less. And then there were these things called power straps that went around your arch that were like an extra strap. And there was that whole thing. And I tried to make those work. And then in around 95, Don Lamson made me a pair of D2s. And this is a custom shoemaker who was at the time in Colorado. I think he's retired and sold the company now. And I think they're in California. But they were called Lamson back then. Now it's D2. And he made my first pair of conventional orthotics. And this is like a crushed box foam type of situation. Mm-hmm. And those were, for me, they were game changing, because I had such a dreadfully unstable blob of jelly foot that when we put any foamy structure under the arch, first of all, it felt like there was a golf ball under my arch, but it gave me this massive amount of, first of all, it solved the volume problem for shoes, because his shoes were custom. And so now I actually had a shoe I could tighten and get a relatively even distribution of pressure. But then the footbed gave me all this contour to work with and to grip onto. And it probably helped my foot be a little bit more active initially. And my power, I had a power meter back then. My sprint power went through the roof compared to previous before I got them. So that was quite encouraging. But over time, that rigid footbed, of course, weakened my foot. And so then it led me on a quest to, and I also was a princess because I had such such low tone in my feet and ankles, and such a lack of stability, that the more structure I gave it, the more nuanced it had to be and the more perfect it had to be. And I kind of had these wrestling matches. Fast forward 10 years later, and I'm stopping on the side of the road and putting a single layer of duct tape under my first metatarsal, and I can feel the difference. This kind of crap. It's like Lost in Princess World. Like I'm literally, tumbling down the rabbit hole with Alice. And it's a disaster because you can't find your ass from your elbow when you're doing that. You're just constantly trying to make this thing be perfect. So I've got different footbeds. They're all thermoplastic and they're rigid, and different top covers and 3/4 length and met buttons and no met buttons and blah, blah, blah. And it goes on and on and on. A million pairs of orthotics. And guess what? None of them really worked because the problem wasn't the footbed. It was based on an old model, which was bring the ground up to meet the foot. And also, let's put the foot in a coffin and lock it in place. Right? And what is closer to death? Movement or not movement? Now, I would argue not movement. unless you get, instantaneously exploded into a fireball, like the last 24 hours of your life, you probably move a lot less than you did the previous 5 years or whatever, right? We go on a slow decline, a nosedive, and that's generally how it works. So fireball was a bad example, too obtuse. Unless you get eaten by a tiger instantaneously or something, I don't know. You die instantly is my point. So, and so we have this belief that we want to mummify the foot and lock it down to get this power transfer. And I do not believe that is effective. In a 5-minute bike race that you do tomorrow, given the alternative is a flip-flop, yes, you pick that. But that's not all that is not our only alternative, nor is it the optimal solution, because athletics is about movement, and life ultimately is about movement. Vital life force is about movement. Everything in life moves. The more vital life force it has, the more it moves, the more it does its things, right? That's the dance. And so when we try to mummify a foot, we're just clamping down on this circulation, this nervous system response. We're not allowing us the pulse of capillary blood flow to enter into the tissues. We're not allowing the ligaments to do their job. We're not allowing the subtle movement. I'm not saying your foot should move around in a cycling shoe when you're doing 400 watts and 110 RPM to the point where we can see it. But there should be micro movements in the shoes. They should allow this. And the more we clamp and mummify, the more we cement our feet in place, the more problems we cause. So that was the journey. That right there was 15 years for me, easily, of me finding stiffer and stiffer shoes until I ended up in a Bont with a straight up carbon orthotic with a 1.5 millimeter foam top cover on it. At the 2004 Olympics in the points race, I raced on a Lust shoe, which was a carbon fiber molded shoe that had an integrated carbon fiber orthotic. I mean, zero movement in the entire system, right? That's what I raced on. And that was the best I could do at the time. It was around 2016, 17, 18, I started playing more with, even in 2015, I was starting to play with minimal shoes. I realized they were what I wanted. Immediately, I don't remember how I found my first pair or how I stumbled on them. I think they were Vivo barefoots, if I remember, but I don't know, to be honest. But I just knew that it was what I wanted. But my feet were still so weak that I was using a flexible footbed in those to transition, right? So I was getting more movement out of the sole, and the footbed was flexing, but I still had some arch support, and my toes were able to be in a little more better alignment. So that was my first compromise, or first step, so to speak. And then I slowly started removing devices from my shoe, removing wedges, removing supports, removing arch support finally. And then I got to a place where that was quite good. That took probably 2 full seasons, I would say, for me to go. And part of the journey, just like you did, part of my touch point on that journey was, I ride to work on a Townie with a flat pedal, and I'm using my barefoot shoes on that. And that was the touch point, was like, this feels better. And especially when I would go from that to my road bike for a ride, I'd work in the morning or whatever, and then go home and go for a ride in the afternoon. I was like, I don't like the way these feel. What? Let's get these freaking wedges out of here. Why is this golf ball under my arch? Like, this just feels like my foot is trapped. And man, the toes on this thing suck. So I started hacking more out of the toe boxes of my mostly bonds at the time. I've got a whole pile of bonds that have just been butchered in my garage to get more room out of them. So,
I mean, for myself, I really feel like my skill of getting my weight over my foot is different. Like, do you notice that about yourself? Because I know it's also related to walking and running too. And that
100%.
walking and running and changing some of your walking and running shoes and footwear has been a part of this journey for you too. So, can you say more about that?
For me, I would say I was actually a glute or posterior chain dominant athlete for most of my riding, and I can see now, like, you put the facts together in the rearview mirror. It's like, well, yeah, a quad dominant athlete. You watch a quad dominant athlete do a lunge, their knee's going to come out way over the foot. What is required for them to do that? Really good ankle mobility, and if they're going to deliver force to the ground or to the pedal, they have to have good tension in their arch and in their foot. I didn't have that, so I probably figured out as a young rider, like, oh, this isn't an effective way for me to deliver force. I need to rely on my butt so that I can drive a little bit more through the heels and not worry so much about the shoes, and then get a really stiff shoe and footbed down there, right? So
Yeah.
now, I seek to have more balance in that posterior anterior chain dominance. That's another way I break the mold, right? Like, who's glute dominant?
I think this is exactly like the thing to talk about, though, a little bit of like, it's one, you realize you were trying to get more pressure through your big toe because that's the front part of your foot instead of as much through the heel. And
Yep.
then you actually have perceived that change, or like you notice that you are stronger or that you have more of this full leg, full foot connectedness. So can you describe that for people? Because I think this is still like, it's a hard concept for people to wrap their heads around a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I would say when I'm pedaling now and I'm really engaging the foot in a proper way, it's more subtle than you probably think, right? It's a subtle engagement for me, I really focus on the balance of pressure on the metatarsals. Like you were saying earlier, you felt like you were pedaling with the first three toes.
Every toe connected to the surface.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. And it's pretty simple, right? If you're a pronator, which the majority of people are, you have excessive inward spiral of the lower limb, and the arch collapses, the medial arch collapses. That's the arch closest to your crank arms. Then you probably feel less pressure under the fourth and fifth toe or fourth and fifth metatarsal than you do under the first metatarsal. And one of the things I did in this course that I was telling you about, the foot and ankle course, is I drew pressure diagrams on the bottom of a foot to explain what this feels like. But you can conceptualize it quite easily. It's like, if you feel like the ball of your big toe is just slamming relentlessly into the shoe, and you can't feel at all the base of the pinky toe, and you notice that your kneecaps are pointing inwards towards each other, you're convergent in those kneecap lightsabers, or headlights, I'll call them, right? Then, and you notice that your arch folds in under pressure, then you're probably a pronator, and that's the way the majority of athletes are. And the old school is like, oh, just put a bunch of wedges under there. But the reason you're pronating is because of the way you're generating force at the hip and or knee, and the foot cannot handle that force or convey it without collapsing. So the problem is on both ends. So we have to change the way you're making force at the hip and or knee. And then we need to stabilize the foot and get that arch to be able to draw up, to have integrity under load, or maybe a better word is tensegrity. That's tension and integrity under load, right? So that we can have even pressure under those metatarsals. So when you feel that, for someone who's a pronator, initially it's going to feel like you said, like all of a sudden you feel like the ground angle change, or maybe you feel a bigger sense of contact, and you suddenly feel the outside of the foot, especially near the toes, lights up, and you get all this, air quotes, pressure, not in a bad way, but in a way where you feel contact, you feel more stable, right? The foot is wandering on the single pivot point. It's got these beautiful five points at the base of each toe, and then the heel, right? That's how a lot of people talk about the foot as a tripod. The heel is obviously harder to feel on a bike because you're on a pedal and the pedal's got an axle. So there's that. But when we're running and walking, or when you're lifting weights, that tripod I don't think it's a perfect cue, but I think it's a good start. So one of the ways that I've described to some of my athletes who are really trying to feel that plantar surface of the foot, that bottom side of the foot, is this works best if the person has cats. So do you have cats?
Yep.
So, okay, then you're familiar with the term with making biscuits, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the cat gets in your lap and they're all
exactly the
lovey-dovey, and they start to do this thing where they squeeze their claws, right? And they paw at you or at the blankie or whatever, or their toy. And when you're making biscuits, kneading biscuits, it's called, this is similar to how I would describe how I want people to start to engage the plantar surface of the foot, the underside of the foot, to get that system engaged with everything that's happening up the chain. And when we make biscuits in the shoes, what we're doing is we're lightly, the key is here, very lightly feeling the toes dig into the sole just a little bit. And that turns on the foot. It's like you're starting to make a fist with your hand, but you don't make it all the way to the fist. You're just beginning to initiate the movement of squeezing those fingers, or in this case, the toes. And we want to be very gentle here. I'm talking a 1 or 2 out of 10, because if you pull too hard and you squeeze your toes too hard, then that'll ball your foot up and it'll pull your metatarsals off the surface of the shoe. That's too much. That's not what we want. You have to have the metatarsals driving into the surface of the shoe. That's how you make power. So that's the best cue that I've come up with. Cueing, I think, is an art in and of itself.
You did a beautiful job explaining it right there. That was exactly the way I feel inside my own self and some of the change there. But, what I want to add to you is, I was saying earlier how, when you jam your foot into that narrow shoe, it doesn't just squeeze your toes together, and like my toes went more up on the edge of my foot than not.
Yep.
So then it was really hard, and those ligaments got very tightened over decades of like being in this position, that then trying to make that tiger claw, the kneading of the biscuits a little bit, it was so difficult. Those nerves have not had that nerve pressure, that pathway activated in the longest time.
Yep.
And so, another condition for this, especially if it's with your big toe, is called hallux rigidus or hallux limitus. And it's just the ability of your big toe and not really able to lift up very much, or also to be able to bend all the way over. And so, this is one of my questions, I guess, to you individually, but also to your audience broadly, is like, one of the core messages I want people to hear about is like, you can make a fist with your foot. And I've literally now trained myself. I can walk on the tops of my toes, and I've had to develop some of that strength and flexibility to do that, because of the fact that my outer toes were pushed up onto the edge of my feet. And the only way to really spread and stretch those toes and get those ligaments activated and get the neural pathways reconnected has been through this process of really trying hard to bend and create that ability to squeeze and activate just even the littlest bit, because my body is just so much memory of only pedaling with 3 toes that really trying to retrain it with the 5-toe activation is different. And it's, for me, there's been a lot to it. The realignment that has happened in my body of like actually getting all of those metatarsal heads on the surface and then applying pressure. Like I needed the help of the toe spacers to help do it, to get those tissues and the nerve pathways open at all. That started to get my body to know, oh, this is where I'm at. And then I've also been now working at it like 10 years and I still have more to go. So, it can be a long process. But some of the earlier alignment challenges that I had in life, they've definitely changed and gone away as I've been more aware and then worked towards this path of improving my strength and mobility, particularly in the strength and mobility and alignment of the feet in the way that we're talking. And so can you, I guess that's my question to you, is like, can you bend your big toe over like that? It's like, maybe that's one of the first things to share. And then how many of your clients that you see could do that with their big toe, for instance?
That's a great question. I have a pretty extensive movement screen, but I haven't looked at that specifically, although I do look at feet and ankles and stability. I could do this pretty effectively on my left. My right is a little bit less on the flexion it's my right is really quite bad at extension. So you mentioned how it's rigidus. That's something that or limitus. That's something I battle on the right side for sure. And I'm quite certain that I had a compressed knuckle for years. It took me a long time to figure out that toe joint had been jammed in there. I don't know if I kicked something when I was younger, or probably wearing ski boots and or cycling shoes that were too small for so long. And I also have my friend Jonathan Vaughters, who is now my boss in a manner of speaking. He used to make fun of me because he was like, "Oh, you've got big toes." Like my big toe is huge. So it's not like a long skinny one. It's like a big fatty but pretty short. And which is weird because that nothing else on me is like that at all. I'm like a skinny dude, but my toes are these weird fat things. And so that probably complicates things, because if I wear a shoe that's the right size but has a rounded toe box, it's just going to get shortened and jammed in there, right? So I've been working on that hallux limitus quite a bit, and I made some good progress. I've got a far infrared sauna just over here to my left, and one of my favorite things to do is get nice and warm in that thing, and then I start to work that joint and massage it and get that toe to come out of that joint a little bit. I just kind of pull on it, right? Wrap it with a towel and just kind of give it some traction and let that joint space open up, and you can see. And then and I walk better when it's like that. Before I figured that out, people could see a hitch in my walk, right? And you might be thinking as an audience member, like, well, why do I care? Cycling shoes are rigid, and even if I'm in Tyler shoes, like, it's a rigid shoe, so I don't care if my toe flexes or extends. But the joint range of motion is critical. I mean, as you said, I agree 100%. Like, maybe everyone isn't made for running, but we all are made for walking for sure. That was our biological imperative. That was our survival strategy to go from quadruped to biped. If you're having trouble walking, this is an indicator that your health is in decline and you need to deal with it. I'm just going to be straight up about that. And if you can't walk, and specifically as you push off, right, and the hip extends, first of all, the hip extension is super important for cyclists because we don't get any of that on the bike. And as people who sit a lot, we also don't get that. But then when you go to push off from that foot, the toes need to extend up enough for you to get a good angle and drive a force. And if they can't, then you have to compensate for that in some other joint up the chain. And that causes challenge, and it makes walking uncomfortable or maybe painful. And then you do less of it. Or you go to a podiatrist and they tell you to put on Hokas or, some sort of other solution. And maybe that could be a solution in the short term if they have a long-term plan. But most of them, unfortunately, don't. They just slap you with Hokas and send you out the door. But if you're like Courtney, then you've actually got real tools to use. So, yeah. And you and I were talking about Dr. Courtney Conley, who's a foot doctor I had on my show a few episodes ago. And also several clients pointed me towards her because her office is here in Colorado. And then she was on Peter Attia, and I think her business exploded there. She was already doing awesome, amazing things. And then that gave it a giant shove, which is cool. But they just released their foot. I can't remember what it's called. It's like the foot conditioning kit or something like that. And it's a box.
Rehab kit or something.
Yeah, it's awesome. Kit. Looks super
I think
cool.
That's a perfect reference for people to go look at. It's like there are these little tools. I kind of call them floor tools is another way to say it. It's like you need these things in your environment that you bump into them 1 minute at a time, 3 minutes at a time, because that adds up in the long term, know, and it's more that we're really trying to retrain your nervous system than necessarily do so much strengthening exercises with drills or something that, it's like we got to change that nervous system over time. It's like now that oh, wow, I really can or should stretch the top of my foot a lot more. And, then that just becomes this kind of long-term thing that you work on, and you see how that relates to kneeling, how that relates to doing lunges then, or you can literally do push-ups or lunges also on the tops of your feet, for instance, to help work on your pointing ability. There's so much from Pilates to learn about this, like full body lengthen and extension at the same time. I think Pilates has some amazing education for people to really try to tap into what we're talking about. We're talking about this like lengthening of your foot to activate all all the muscles underneath there at the same time. Like it's
Yep.
that lengthening is what helps make that arch itself too. So
Lengthening and strengthening.
we can apply that principle, to something as small as your foot or to your in total riding posture.
Yep.
I think some people have a little bit of a wrong idea in their head where they're like trying to make a more aerodynamic shape, but they've like compressed their posture to such a way that now they don't have the full body connectedness and the power. And so then it's like, well, you're overly sacrificing your ability to be comfortable, especially for hours, in too short of a aerodynamic gain or something like that. Again, it's like trying to make a shoe lighter by making the toe box more narrow.
Yeah. I mean, I could say it maybe depends on the rider's goals, right? If their only goal is to win a 25-minute time trial, then aerodynamics, especially if it's a flat time trial, then aerodynamics are so important that they might, but they have to recognize that they are trading off short-term health for short-term gains. And if they do it over a long enough timeline and they train in that position enough, it will begin to impact long-term health, right? Because being aerodynamic on a bike is straight up, it's an act of contortionism. There's no other way to describe it. It is, and every aspect of being aero on a bike is against human posture. Like, also, there's no other way to say it. So if you're trying to be an aero time trialist and you care about your long-term health, your onus is to offset that with appropriate mobility and movement and strength and conditioning to try to balance that out. Otherwise, you just end up shaped like an aerodynamic bike rider. And we've all seen bike riders at the grocery store who've been riding too long and don't do anything else, right? You can see them from 3 aisles away. It's like, oh, wow. Okay, here we go. I don't want to be one of those people. So I found Courtney's site here. It's the Gait Happens Foot Health Kit. So it's pretty cool. It's got toe strengtheners and a little myofascial release ball and some other goodies in there. Yeah, cool product. Really good. I have never tried actually her toe strengtheners, which are like little rubber bands that are connected in the middle that go around each 5
I haven't
toes.
tried them yet either. I want to try them. They look cool.
You spread out. I think I'm going to be horrible at those.
Well, I've used like the ones for your hands, that climbers use, and I mean, they definitely give your fingers a pretty big workout.
Yeah. And toes are not as strong, so mine aren't anyway. Yeah. Okay. Good stuff. So maybe we can wrap up a bit by describing. You can share some of your favorite ways. You've already talked about one. Your favorite ways to help condition your feet on a daily basis. Well, we've talked about a few. We've talked about running and walking and barefoot shoes and barefoot and you've talked about spending time on the tops of the feet, right? Whether it's just doing stretches that way or you're doing push-ups or that kind of thing. Sure. What are some of your go-tos?
So, here I'm demonstrating a little like kind of rocky mat.
Nubby mat. Yeah.
Nubby mat. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Got some other kind of little nub like things to stand on.
Yep.
I work at a computer a lot. And so I'm often just trying to do as many things as I can to help ameliorate that experience. And if you can get a little bit of like a passive benefit while you're focused doing something else, I think that adds up in a long way. So, in terms of making your feet stronger, well, you're going to need more stimulation on a regular basis. And so like these little nubby mats, they help your feet just kind of start to naturally spread a little bit more, be activated, lengthen, balance on all your feet. And then it's like, you just periodically kind of raise up a little bit. And it's like, it will be a little uncomfortable. And, we want actually those nubs to give your brain sensation that like you should be able to raise up onto the balls of your feet and your toes on any of these kinds of surfaces. And some of them are more challenging than others, like the two I just showed you. One's a little easier, one's a little harder, for instance, in terms of the stimulation. I mean, I literally have some mats that are like literally nails that you stand on, They're just different levels of the same concept. The general concept is can you spread your toes out? And then can you raise it up on the balls of your feet and lift your posture up? Which we know from physics, it's the raising of your center of mass is what requires the control and power. So even if it's only just like a couple inches of raising your heels off the ground, well, human bodies can balance when you're up on the balls of your feet and your toes, and someone who's maybe in ballet, for instance, is going to be extremely good at this, and they could stay up on the balls of their feet for minutes at a time. It's like, well, you need to, Mr. Athlete, you got to look seriously at yourself in the mirror and say, like, how good am I at that? And I realized I wasn't very good at it, and it especially took some of these textured surfaces to help show me where I was deficient, because it was effectively like where those nubs kind of poke in your feet, they let you know where some of that weakness is. It's almost like, because they're not so aggressive that they're going to injure you, or because you're the one applying pressure, you get the immediate feedback sensation of like, oh, that's too much, I can't handle that. It's like, okay, well, back off, go back down to a lower level mat that doesn't have as much sensory stimulation, that's easier for you. Or you use some of those same mats in a lunge or squats, or a variety of ways where again, we're just trying to challenge your vestibular system. I really liked how you immediately in the beginning of our conversation, you were talking about like defensive postures. And it's a thing you experience on a bicycle a lot. As soon as you start to lose your balance, there's a whole thing that happens psychologically as your body's trying to recognize, I've lost balance, I'm no longer really in contact, and now you're like fighting to find stability again, and especially running in sandals, like I experienced this a lot, and that's some of what my whole body's retraining needed. Was, it's like, how can I land on a surface underfoot that's so aggressive to my feet? It's like the confidence that you have to run on some of really pokey rocks and stuff like this. Like the harder that is, that's that same sensation of I'm not safe. I'm falling off balance because I can't actually apply pressure to the ground like this. So, these were some of my realizations of this. And then I've just been trying to take these philosophies and find ways to integrate them into doing dishes and doing laundry and just like the daily tasks that you're going to end up doing. You want a little nerve stimulation too, it's like do a couple toe raises while you're doing that. And then it's like you can make improvement over time by doing some of these kinds of things. Even the same thing with a bike. It's like some of my short rides that are only 15 minutes because I'm running an errand, or, I just want to step away from the computer for a few minutes. Like those are some of my favorite. So I like not necessarily having to change clothes to get on a bicycle. I like just focusing on balancing on the bike while I'm out there a little bit, for 15 minutes at a time, or even just kind of slalom, down the road a little bit, like working on what is it like to lean my body into a corner and so forth. It's like cycling isn't always about how many watts you're putting out, how far you went. It's like you can have other motivating factors and still be giving your body all the kind of sensation it needs, or a little bit of thrill of riding at speed, or just fun. I love cycling because it feels fun and enjoyable to me, and I like seeing all the different landscape I can get to in a short period of time. It's definitely not my only movement practice, and I would really urge any cyclist to please be really thinking seriously about your walking and hopefully eventually your running. And I do think that you should have some of that, because it's going to make your joints and your ligaments that much stronger, and you're going to be more injury resistant long term. And cycling, I think, is just an excellent way to increase some training load. It's like, well, if you're trying to run a lot, you can end up injured if you're running 6 days a week, unless you're extraordinarily consistent about how you're doing it. And so, well, maybe you just want a couple extra workouts. Like cycling is an incredible way of doing that, giving your body some of that training stress without additional ground contact that might be difficult to recover from.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah, I don't know. What do you think? How has some of that changed in your own life, and like the ways that you've hardened your body, I guess, to be more injury resistant for cycling too?
Yeah, I would say those are all great tips. I agree. I think we don't have to think about. Well, one thing I'll say is, you mentioned you've been on this journey for 10 years, and I've probably been on this journey for a similar amount of time, maybe not quite as long. And I don't want that to dissuade people. I mean, on the one hand, that could be very inspirational. On the other hand, it could be very like, whoa, dude, I don't want to work on my feet for the next 10 years. So, I think also, I'll put Tyler and I in the same category for a moment and say that we're a little bit maniacal about this kind of stuff. I'm always thinking about movement in the human body. It's just where my mind goes. So every time I walk up the stairs, I'm thinking about posture. When I walk downstairs, I'm thinking about, on days where I can take 2 steps at a time as opposed to 1, I know that my nervous system is fresh. I know that I feel safe in my environment. I know I feel hydrated. I love
that observation. That's cool.
Right. Yeah. I mean, 2 stairs is like, try it. It's quite, especially first thing in the morning when you haven't really moved.
And you got to have that hop of confidence
right. Yeah. So that's a simple but powerful indicator into what my readiness is, my ready state is for exercise on that day. I also like the idea of just, instead of looking at it as a 10-year to-do list or another workout that you've got to add to your cycle. I love what you said about, I'm doing it while I'm doing dishes or laundry. I do that stuff all the time. Yeah. I wear socks around the house. Niboso makes a great sock that has texture on the inside of it. Exactly. That can help. So then you don't have to have you could have a mat by your computer, but you don't have to carry the mat around if you want to have it during dishes or whatever. So I put my toe spacers on. A lot of times I'll do this before I get ready for a ride. I'll put my spacers on first thing, and I'll put the Niboso socks with the texture on the inside, and I cruise around the house while I'm making my coffee or doing my breakfast or doing my morning mobility routine, which is usually the first thing I do. And then I'm getting more bang for my buck out of it, right? And I'm integrating these movement snacks into my day. I'll work with a client. I'll do a phone call with them for 45 minutes. I get up. I'll do whatever. I'll roll on the foam roller for a moment. I'll hang on we have a steel beam here. I'll hang and do some hanging drills. I'll activate my hands. I'll do a couple pull-ups. I'll get on the ground. I'll move my feet and ankles. I'll walk on the metatarsals of my feet, both with my toes engaged and also walking with the toes elevated, just on the metatarsals. Then I'll walk on my heels. I'll walk on the outsides of my feet, right? Which I call monkey feet. I'll walk on the insides of the feet as best I can. I try to work the feet in as many planes of movement and as many different loads as comfortable or as possible. And I'm not worried about reps or sets or even time and attention. It's more like, just do it until it starts to feel like I'm getting load here. Something's burning. My tibial anterior is starting to burn, or my soleus hurts, or the pressure under my metatarsals is starting to escalate. And when it starts to suck, then you're done. Like, to be done. You did your job. It doesn't matter if it took 20 seconds or 60 seconds, or you did 12 reps or 1.
I agree.
You're improving, and just insert these movement snacks into your day. And then over time, you notice this massive improvement in your foot function, right? Play with different devices like you've got. I've got this thing called a MoveMate here. I think I sent you the link to this. Yeah, isn't that cool? Yeah. So that's what I use when I do standing meetings. I have a bookcase, and I just put my computer up here, and I'll stand on the MoveMate the whole time. And, you kind of move your feet, and it's got a little balance component to it, and it wakes everything up and moves the fascia and the bones, and I'll stand up occasionally just like you do. And I feel these things really help my foot function over time. And then that in conjunction with daily walking. I just recorded another pod with a guy named Thomas McDaniel. He's a bike fitter for a long time, and he's been in the industry forever. And he said he's really well educated. And he said one really powerful thing. He said, if people would just get off their fat asses and go for a walk after dinner every day, that will do so much for your health right there. Just that. We have to make it actionable, right? Theory is one thing, and we can explain physiology. We can explain muscles and fascia and bones and all the things. And those are all useful bits to know. But when we actually want to make a difference in someone's life, we have to give something actionable to them. And go for a walk once or twice a day, even if it's just around your block. 6 minutes is better than 0 minutes. And if you're walking with a little bit of attention to posture, and if you're a person who drives off that, you're always driving that metatarsal, that first ball, the first toe, then focus a little bit on the outside of the foot and see if you can change that pattern. It's pretty simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think we're on the same page, man. It sounds like we have very similar practices.
Yeah, it's really enjoyable to share and talk about, and I want others to have confidence from some of our real experience. Like, we have made quite dramatic changes to our bodies. I think you can probably share a link to maybe my video, my feet changing shape that went viral from years ago, and some other things that people could look at so they could like actually see a video of exactly what we're talking about. Because this is kind of like a 3D space subject, like we were talking about. It's like it's the squeezing of the toes sideways, but it's like, then if your bones are changing position, well, there might be a vertical component too. And both the sideways squeezing and the vertical stacking is like, those are all things that need to be changed, or like that you have awareness that maybe it shouldn't be like that. And then I want it to be something different over time. Like I'm still getting a lot of learning in my own ways from ballet teachers. There's a lot of excellent information about some of these subjects in ballet, and they just have educators who really understand alignment of the knee, the ankle, the hip, for instance. And then they also know what to say to someone who isn't very skillful at that yet. And so it's like, here's a beginner level exercise for you. Here's where we'd like you to be able to eventually get to, but because you're only here, do these to start out. I think that it's good if you want to go explore on your own, but I also want you to have confidence that there are people having success doing this. There are educators out there. And, we're really just trying to bring all that information first into cycling, but also into many other sports. I just think cycling is a particularly good one because there are many people like yourself who are very posture focused, and you are skilled at communicating why it's necessary to align your bones or your posture a particular way. And people need that education, in my opinion, or that's been my experience from archery. It's like, you're not going to get as good as the top archers by trying to figure out all the technique on your own. It's like, if you get some early guidance on, an acceleration path, you have a much better chance of getting to a higher level than not. And eventually it's going to be, you're on your own a little bit, because it's everyone's job to figure out their own individual body and what you need to improve. But, hopefully some of the framework of what we're sharing today is like giving people inspiration that, young or old, you can make a dramatic change and improvement in your balance and your posture and your foot health and your foot strength in some of these ways. So we'd love to hear from anyone who needs more guidance or some inspiration. And yeah, it's exciting because now there's more brands than ever who have some of this same message. And we're just trying to make products for activities that people love. And cycling is one that you and I both love. And so it's cool to be able to give people this new experience that you don't have to have this really tight sensation with your feet riding a bike. It really can be just free and joyful and, confidence inspiring with your balance.
Yeah, agreed. 100%. And it's so important. If you follow Peter Attia at all, he talks about the ways people die. And there's the 4 horsemen, which are disease. And then the 5th is blunt force trauma, which most of the time ends up being a car accident because someone was texting. And then so those 5 things are the way a lot of people die. But the remainder is people, either they die or the last decade or maybe 5 years of their life is severely compromised because they fall. And when they fall, they end up in the hospital and they either get, MRSA or COVID or some infection or something, and that ends up killing them, or they end up in a wheelchair, or they never quite recover. If they're elderly and they fall, there's a fall, then you break a femur, that can be, quite challenging to recover from. So what I'm saying is foot health is also about protecting the quality of your health span to some degree. I mean, we have to do,
I love that.
So you have to have good foot and ankle stability and strength and good reactivity right? Meaning if you start to fall, you can get your foot under you. And then you have to have strong bones so that if you do fall, they don't break, right? Hopefully, and muscle mass to protect you and be strong enough to respond. So all those play into it. So general health is the guideline there. You have to be healthy to do all those things. You have to have not died of cancer to do those things, to worry about falling. But we want to, being able to run and walk, or at least walk, is fundamental to human experience, right? It is our biological imperative. And key to that is having strong and stable, healthy feet. So go running, go walking. If you could tolerate running, do some walking, do some daily movement snacks. The other one I can give that's a quick tip that I do before I begin my strength workouts, I almost always begin with jump rope. Jump rope is it's the most brilliantly simple, old school, rocky ass stuff. But it's like you're bouncing on the balls of the feet. You're building tension in that plantar fascia. You're building rhythm. It's just brilliantly simple. So that's what I got. Tyler, thank you very much for being on the pod today. It's been a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was fun.
And let's tell everyone again one more time where they can find your Leviathan shoe.
There it is.
There it is. Yeah. And that's on strongfootathletics.com, right?
Strong Feet Athletics. Yeah.
Thank you.
Strong Feet Athletics.
Feet, because it's not just one foot that's strong, it's both of them.
Yeah.
There it is. And you guys also have an Instagram channel that's the same?
The same, correct.
Okay, perfect. All right.
Check us out at Strong Feet Athletics. We'd love to hear from you.
Cool. Thanks, man.
Attention, well dippers. Did you know that I offer a unique service at my studio in Boulder, Colorado? An integrative fitting is the culmination of my experience and understanding that helps an athlete have a deeper insight into their relationship to cycling and movement. This is understood in the context of how the dream, goal, or objective aligns the client's choices and habits. The psyche, the environment, and drive will all influence the current expression of athletic ability. As we understand these factors, we can shape and direct athletic potential. What this means in a practical sense is that we spend about 6 hours working together, including a short or outdoor ride. We will film you on and off the bike, and we will discuss an extensive intake questionnaire. You will leave the fitting with a unique perspective on your function and with actionable pathways to improve your performance. This service was created specifically to help cyclists who have been through various fitting sessions and have had unsuccessful or unsatisfactory results. We dig deeper to find more meaningful outcomes. If you are interested in knowing more about an integrative fitting, please visit my website, colbypierce.com, where you can book an appointment. Epilogue. I want to share a few brief thoughts about the inception of cycling and alignment. The purpose of this podcast is for me to get 3.5 decades of hard-fought lessons out of my skull. Some of them through my own research and reading. Some of them I've been taught through mentors and colleagues, other riders, other racers. A lot of it, a massive amount of it, was simply trial and error through my own stubborn methods. And that has amassed a certain amount of experience and knowledge, understanding. And while I think I'm reasonably smart and I know quite a bit of stuff, I want to make it clear that the opinions that I share on this podcast are belief systems built on what I've experienced to this point. And that some of those opinions are pretty strong, but they are also loosely held. That is to say that if I learn more about a topic and have a greater level of clarity or understanding, then my old belief systems will be abandoned and I will now operate under that newfound knowledge. So I'm not here to tell people all the things that I know. I'm here to explain what I've learned to this point. And there's a big difference. Also, that is the intent when I discuss things on the pod with guests, is to learn from them.
and have a discourse. Because if we can't have a discourse as adults, then we've lost one of the basic tenets of modern society. Even if we disagree, we ought to be able to, in most cases, shake hands and walk away. Because after all, this is sport we're talking about, and while sport is training for life, it's nothing to get too upset over. The purpose of the podcast is to help me help other people, and specifically to help them actualize their highest potential by illuminating a path that enables alignment with their truth, their intent, and their coherence. That's really the end goal. So I'm grateful for your listening. My intent is also not, to be clear, to gain an audience or become popular or gain social status in any way. I don't care about that stuff. That said, if you feel an episode that you have heard will help someone you know, please share it with them. That helps us reach the end goal, which is to help more people. Thank you for listening. I'm grateful for your time and attention. Blessings.